Where to begin? I'll start when I first saw the ad on Craigslist. It stated that the person was looking for a responsible and hardworking person to edit wedding films in the Philadelphia area. I've been into film since I was 5, and at the time I was working as a cashier at a local grocery store, so I felt this was my chance to finally get a prestigious job as a filmmaker. I responded to the ad, and I got a response a few days later. He told me his business, and I looked up his films, and they were genius. I've never seen such high-quality wedding films. They really told a story, and I was intrigued. A few days later, we planned an interview. It was a dreary day when I went to his worn-down apartment in a city that was local, but kind of ghetto. As I walked out of my car, he greeted me at the door. He seemed genuinely nice, but I felt a little off. I'm good at sensing people's emotions, and for some reason I couldn't sense normalcy in the way he acted. It was strange. He did everything that was considered professional outside, and then we walked up to his apartment/office. He was 23 at the time, a self-made entrepreneur in the wedding film business. I remember one of the first things he said to me, "If you work for me, I won't teach you just about video. I'm going to teach you about life." Being the naive 21-year-old I was, I thought this guy was just a really great businessman. Sure, he sounded full of himself, but what boss isn't? I got the job and I was ecstatic. I felt on top of the world working for one of the best videographers in the Philadelphia area. I came into work the next day and ended up working on one of those TV dinner tables with a computer on it and a rickety chair. I didn't care, I was doing what I loved and it was awesome. A few months go by and I start noticing his weird behavior. I remember a specific time when his sister came over to visit him and I met her for the first time. She wanted to get to know me, so she kept asking me questions about my life and trying to make jokes with me. He wasn't having it. This was the first time I sensed something was seriously wrong with my boss. As his sister would try to engage me in conversation, he would tell me to shut up and do my work. Apparently, a 5-minute conversation was too much time to be wasted. I quickly learned the editing program as I've edited extensively in the past. I eventually was editing 1 or 2 films a week, and despite my boss being sort of strange, I thought it was the job for me. This was when the craziness started. I started to learn the DSLR cameras. I began learning his basics of editing skills in his films. I'm very talented in video editing, but sometimes it takes weeks, even months, to learn how a particular company goes about their editing. The first thing I noticed is that he had clinical depression. He would look to me for support and to make him happy again. I thought I was being a good employee and friend by offering sympathy because I've suffered from depression since I was 12. Eventually, the therapy sessions became a little uncomfortable. He would put his arm around me, despite the fact that I'd been with my boyfriend for 3 years. One time, he got me so high on marijuana that I couldn't stand on my own 2 feet. To me, it didn't matter. My boyfriend smoked weed, and this was a great time to finally get into something he enjoyed too. As the months went on, I started to notice things that I didn't before. He was working behind a huge mahogany desk with a large screen while I was working on a TV dinner table on a small laptop editing most of his films. So then came the shooting part. I began to learn the basics of shooting a wedding, getting the right shots and the right lighting. It was then that I started to realize this man was unstable and possibly aggressive. There were nights when we would do a same-day edit. These were 3-minute videos that the company would create for the couple and show at the end of the evening. It was a stressful environment. He was usually the one editing the same-day edits in the beginning, but the pressure was terribly strong. I would film with people he knew for years that had their own video companies. I was ignored, I was the outcast, and I sort of followed them around. I felt useless, but I held on knowing that I'd eventually learn the trade. As the months passed, I was his main editor. I edited all the films, chose all the music, and sometimes would lead my own shoots when he had another shoot somewhere else. I found myself to be extremely talented. I know how to make a film beautiful and how to make a story of love meaningful. I noticed that he loved to criticize me over time. If it wasn't the audio, it was the video. If it wasn't the video, it was the lighting. If it wasn't the lighting, it was the photographer. And if it wasn't the photographer, it was me. I began to beat myself up. How could I not be good enough when I was trying my absolute hardest? Was I a failure? Should I even be in this field? There were a few more same-day edits that my boss would do the edit on. It was extremely stressful because I had to make sure we had all the awesome shots we needed in order to make a fantastic film. Eventually, I edited my own same-day edit. I cried because of their reaction. I feel I'm a pretty sympathetic person, so I saw their happiness and felt whole when I saw that. Despite the pressure, I continued on with my job, but as I continued, I noticed more aggressive behavior on his behalf. He started hitting on me, flirting endlessly, and giving me back rubs. Do you know how creepy it is to get a back rub from your boss inside of his own house? It started becoming more of a hangout session rather than work. He'd tell me about his low self-esteem and would somehow work his way into putting his arm around me. I felt extremely uncomfortable during these times, but I was naive and I had no idea how to approach the situation. Eventually, he became an angry person. He would scream at me in the car or belittle me at a shoot. I felt like I was nothing and that I was an idiot. I felt that I'd never become the amazing filmmaker that this man had become. He constantly belittled my edits. He'd say, "This film is boring and you need to redo it." But all the while, he was on his computer surfing the internet while I edited these films to their perfection. Over time, I realized that I was doing everything besides booking the gigs. I was editing the film, I was burning the DVDs, I was posting the blogs, I was shooting weddings, and I was dealing with this man, the man that had made me feel like I was small. Eventually, I started standing up to him. He didn't like that. How dare someone challenge his ideals? I noticed when I did question his ideas that he would become aggressive. He acted as if because he was 2 years older than me and owned his own business that I was a schmuck, and without him I'd be nothing. The flirting and belittling continued. I was told I was not meant to be with my boyfriend. He started becoming more physical by trying to connect with me by introducing me to sci-fi shows. I enjoyed them, and I believe this was his way of having a hobby between him and I that I did not have between me and my boyfriend. And so the physical contact went on, and I, a naive kid, thought he just didn't realize social norms. He was socially retarded and had to read books on how to be a good person and to persuade people to do things. I thought that he didn't realize that touching your employee over and over again wasn't the right way to go about things. No, I was wrong. He knew exactly what he was doing. Over time, he continued to touch me. He would massage my shoulders. He would insist on a hug, much longer than a normal hug. He was in the pickup artist industry, and after a while, I felt like his prey. Eventually, I started standing up for myself and becoming equally aggressive towards him. I began telling him I wasn't comfortable with his touching. I called him out on his bullshit. I told him his yelling at shoots was irresponsible and cruel. I mentioned that his personality was narcissistic because he wanted to know what I thought he was. I told him he was socially retarded and that it was pathetic that he had to read a book to understand how to be nice to another human being. He eventually accepted what he was, I think, because at this point things started getting worse. There was an instance when I couldn't remember where he parked the car to retrieve his cell phone. He was waiting at the front desk at the venue to figure out which room the bride was in. It was about a 15-minute walk to the garage, and when I got there, I started panicking because I couldn't remember which floor we parked on. We eventually ran into each other, and he immediately started screaming at me in the elevator with two poor non-English-speaking Asian men standing as witnesses. "It's floor 5! How could you not know that? We park there every time! 5! My boss yelled at me, so loud that the two men in the elevator were noticeably scared. When they left, I told him I was quitting once and for all. I couldn't stand the abuse anymore, the yelling, the belittling, the nonsense. I was done. 2 weeks later, I was working on an edit at his house. It would be about a month until I was out of there. I know, I was being very generous with my time, but I was trying to do the right thing. I remember distinctly him talking to me, joking around, and then grabbing a pocket knife on his table which had been fully extracted. He held it to my neck. He tried to play it off as if he were joking, but I knew he wasn't. I joked with him so he would release the knife. For the rest of the night, I was incredibly scared, but I wasn't about to tell him. Remember, this is a sociopath. He gets off on fear, and he gets off on power. For the rest of the night, I played loyal employee. This is when I finally said, "This is it." I was scared for my life. When is it ever okay to put a knife to a person's throat, no matter how well you know them? It scared the shit out of me, and in a week I told him I was leaving his company. He was enraged. He pounded on the steering wheel as I told them this in the car. This reminded me of the time we went to New York City to shoot a huge wedding, and on the way home he freaked out because he kept taking the wrong exits. He pounded the steering wheel, was driving erratically, and was verbally abusing me for not reading Google Maps correctly, apparently. I don't own an iPhone and never have. I don't know how to use them very well, so I was the idiot. Not the guy who was driving and taking the wrong exits. I was stuck in a car with a madman. I just couldn't take it anymore. The knife, the yelling, the abuse, the touching. I eventually left this job and got a job with a mutual business friend. I can't explain to you the fear I felt with that knife to my neck. At that moment, I realized I was definitely working for a psychopath, and that I would be killed if I didn't leave that situation immediately. To this day, I haven't talked to him in about 2 years. He ruined a huge part of who I am. I used to trust people, and I used to believe in those who had a dream. But this man... I could go on for hours about all the terrible things he's done. I barely even covered the evil things this man has done to me.